Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today I wanted to give you an update on the budget and also the economic impact of the rain bomb that slammed into Queensland just a little bit over a week ago today. Although the weather event was pretty short, it was only about 3 days in duration, the cost of this weather event will be very significant. When it comes to the public infrastructure cost and also the budget cost of this event, Treasury estimates that cost will be between $2 and $2.5 billion. That includes money for disaster response and recovery and support measures. Of that, at least $1 billion will be allocated to the restoration of public infrastructure of local governments and the state government. That includes things like roads, rail systems, bridges and other infrastructure. And you only have to look at the ferry terminal here and the impact that it had here as an indication of the impact that this flooding event had. When it comes to private infrastructure, currently the estimate is about $936 million when it comes to insurance claims. So that's private buildings, private homes and private infrastructure. When we look more broadly to our economy, Queensland Treasury estimates that this weather event will impact our economic growth in Queensland by 1/4%. And that is again around $1 billion in economic activity for the state that will be lost as a consequence of the weather event. Compared to other weather events in recent times, Cyclone Yasi, Tropical Cyclone Debbie, ex-tropical cyclone Oswald, the economic impact is likely to be lower on Queensland, and that's because the resources industry in particular, the resources industry has not been badly impacted by this event, and the impact on agriculture, while severe in some areas, hasn't had the same impact as those cyclones which came down the Queensland coast. But for people who are throwing out treasured possessions or are hosing out mud from their homes in stinking heat, it doesn't really matter which flood costs more. What we do know about Queensland is that we are strong and resilient. And the faster that we can recover from this, as we have recovered from COVID-19, the stronger we will be as a state and the stronger our economic recovery will be. So our focus as a government, working with all levels of government now, can I say, is to ensure Queenslanders get back on their feet, that individuals, families, businesses and communities can recover as quickly as possible. For us, that is our number one priority, and for me as Treasurer, that's the pathway to restoring what's been lost and to restoring the strength of the Queensland economy. I'm happy to take questions on that. Well, look, we anticipate the impact on our budget will be this financial year and perhaps next financial year. But we think at this stage, the forecasting at this stage, it won't flow beyond those financial years, and that the return to surplus in 24-25 will remain on track. But of course, we will be in the hands of nature. We will be in the hands of the weather. But as you know from me, from the start, I've always been focused on restoring the fiscal strength of Queensland, restoring our budget position and building in those fiscal buffers, which is what we do in our budgets anyway. We anticipate natural disasters, we take that into account and we try and put that into our budgeting for Queensland. So we anticipate this year and next year, but by the time we get to 24-25, we'll still be on track to deliver our surplus. Well, the cost to the state initially is $2 to $2.5 billion. Now that will ultimately be shared with the federal government, but in the first instance we have to pay. We have to pay out of our budget in the first instance, in the short term. So we'll work that through. We'll of course have other things that will come through. There'll be some impact on revenue. Other revenue lines won't be impacted. There might be additional costs that we don't anticipate now. Can I also say these are the preliminary estimates, a little over 7 days after the rain bomb struck Queensland, so there will be an ongoing cost calculation for our state.
And the overall
Well, it's probably slightly lower than 2011, just given the nature of the event. But certainly the economic impact will be lower than 2011 because we just haven't had that broad-scale economic damage through industries like agriculture and resources and otherwise. But there's been a whole range of business and industries impacted by this, and they're still in the recovery phase, and we'll be supporting them. Well, it obviously depends on the weather and the resources that can be applied to that. Obviously, all councils are working as hard as they can. They're being supported by state agencies, and we now have the Australian Army and other Defence Force personnel that are assisting in the recovery, and that will help. Clearly, there is a very large mountain of waste and damaged property that needs to be removed. And I know and in our Cabinet discussions today, we are focused on assisting communities getting that rubbish off their footpath, out of their front yard and away from their residences. Now, this is a big clean-up, don't get me wrong. This is going to test the resources we've got available, but our priority as a government is to deal with that sort of thing first, and we'll worry about the cost later. Yeah, we've taken, that's a really good point, and we need to constantly work on that. We've, of course, have Australia's first and best disaster response agency, the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, which was established by Labor back in 2011 after those natural disasters, that flooding in 2011. And we focus progressively on strengthening public infrastructure, something we call resilience and betterment, building that into when we rebuild things. And again, this pontoon behind us is an example of that. You see that the gate has swung open to allow the water to flow past. That sort of rebuild, even though there's some damage here, means that the pontoon hasn't been washed off its moorings. And we saw that extensively in 2011, causing potential damage and dangerous hazards to the river and the river system. So rebuilding like this is important, and doing that across public infrastructure will remain a significant priority for our government. No, we don't anticipate any increase. That was a promise we made at the election, and we're holding tight to that promise, notwithstanding the natural disasters. But we never know what's around the corner when it comes to natural disasters, but there's no change to our tax at the moment. And given what people are going through and what businesses are going through, I'm going to work my darndest to ensure that we don't increase any financial burden on them. Look, I'm sorry I can't provide you with an answer to that. What we want to ensure, though, is education can continue. That there's been a slight disruption to learning this year because of the pandemic and now the flood. So it's very important that we get children back into classrooms, particularly primary school children, so they can get the education they need. And whatever we do, we'll work with the school community, we'll do it sensitively. We want to make sure those kids not only can learn, but can spend time with their friends at school, which is very important for their social and emotional health. Probably at this stage, infrastructure like roads, that's all, they always get smashed. We know in this case there's been some significant impact on rail infrastructure as well, so they're probably the two most important at this time. No, but obviously we have worked on that sort of resilience previously. I've released, when I was the Minister for State Development and the Minister responsible for the QRA, released a number of strategies, and I'm happy to provide you with information on that, around improving planning in the southeast in particular, but also looking at how we can support better infrastructure and considering those communities that have been sequentially hit time and time again by flooding. I think all levels of government need to look at that. We've supported councils and their buybacks, so I think that's something we need to consider going forward. I came back a day early because my community, a small part of my electorate, was impacted down in Marsden. I was visiting those householders yesterday. Look, we have to work on selling Queensland to the world That's what I did when I was at the biggest expo that's ever been held, one of the biggest ever, and also one of the biggest international events this year, 22 million people, 190 countries, and that I could go there and talk about the Olympics and the golden decade of opportunity for Queensland really made a big impact. And to pay for this sort of cost, to pay for this sort of impact on Queenslanders, we need to generate trade, we need to generate investment, and we need to generate jobs. That strengthens our economy. It creates the revenue base we need to pay for these natural disasters. And I don't apologise for selling Queensland to the world. That's my job as the Trade Minister. I'll always do that. I'm proud to do it, but I'm proud to tell our story and to generate that investment, those jobs, and those trade opportunities for Queensland businesses who joined me on the trade mission, who are making big inroads into the Middle Eastern market for Queensland companies. I'm pleased to support them, which was the principal reason I went over there. Well, the total cost to our budget is $2.5 billion, and then there's an impact on economic activity which is reduced by $1 billion. You can't really add them together because they're different measures, but there's an impact, a big impact from a big rain event, and our focus is on helping, as I said, individuals, families, communities and businesses. But one thing's for sure and certain, we will never forget the flood of 2022. Yeah, these are the preliminary estimates we've made, and the cost, I think, is likely to increase, particularly the cost on private householders and on private businesses who are still, frankly, cleaning up, and then will be doing their insurance. They'll be lodging their insurance claims a little bit later on. So I think that $1 billion figure, the 936 million, I think in particular is likely to increase, and the total cost to local and state governments is likely to increase, particularly as local governments do their detailed assessments and pass them through to the state. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon.